Guys, thank you so much for being here, and I'm quite excited about being able to kind of deep into some of the issues the exhibition Más Allá, Mar Canta, diasporic intimacies and labor. It's kind of like raising up and trying to open windows to explore issues that are related to the Chinese diaspora in Central America and the Caribbean. And in this case with you, we are having, let's say, a conversation that somehow feeds from the experience of like what it means to live in Central America, in this case, Costa Rica and Guatemala. So I am quite keen on trying to think how is that we think on Central America in relation to the Chinese diaspora, how is that issues of the process of creation with some works like intimacies, formal qualities of the works, sound, and so on, and engage and entangle, in this case, in the exhibition and in your work. So I'm gonna briefly introduce all of you. So Esvin Alarcón Lam is an artist interested in the materiality and its relations with contemporary politics and the Chinese diaspora from a local perspective. Alarcón Lam is based in Guatemala, where he organizes Pagoda Imaginaria, an independent art residency program. Among his recent exhibitions are Omniscient Leslie Lohman Museum, New York, Mesotrópicos, Mac Panama, Counterflags, Abrams Art Center, New York, This Might Be a Place for Hummingbirds Gallery in Corner Park, Berlin, and The Sun Teaches Us That History is Not Everything at Osage Foundation, Hong Kong. Mimian Hsu is descendant from Taiwanese immigrants who arrived in the 70s due to the political relations between the island of Formosa and Costa Rica. Her life and work are linked to this process of cultural hybridization and acculturation of the Chinese immigrant in the American continent. Mimian has exhibited her work in the Vincent Price Museum, California, the Osage Gallery, Hong Kong, the Aso Museum, Arizona, and the Museo de Arte y Diseño Contemporáneo in San Jose, Costa Rica. She has participated in the 6th Bienal de Artes Visuales del Istmo Centroamericano and received an honorary mention at the 5th Bienal del Caribe, Museo de Arte Moderno, Santo Domingo, República Dominicana. Hsu directed the artist-run space Despacio from 2015 to 2017. And finally, the Colectivo Hapa is a contemporary art collective founded in 2020 by 3 Costa Rican artists of mixed Chinese or Taiwanese ethnic heritage: Jennifer Krasinski-Tan, Karen Ol-Seyu, and Anna Matucci Wo-Ching. And apologies for the atrocious pronunciation. Using a diverse range of mediums like drawing, installation, photography, and performance, they create an auto-ethnographic art process to explore topics such as feminism, power, and heritage. So without further ado, I am going to leave Esvin. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I selected some images that come from where I am right now. I'm doing a residency in Saudi Arabia, and I'm also working for some reason with a friend, which is a tailor as well. But also I'm gonna show you some images that I think kind of resume what I'm gonna be talking here today. So for some reason, I went to this tailor shop today, and I asked him, like, you know, I was of course in mind that I will be here with you today, and it just made more sense even, you know, like, because I have been going there, but today I realized, like, you know, he has a Chinese machine and this Germany scissor that they use in the tailor shop, and which of course relates to the history of my family. I actually was telling Mosharif, he's from Bangladesh. Yesterday, he invited me to have lunch with him in a very, you know, casual, you know, not planned moment. And I'm mentioning Mosharif because here in Saudi Arabia, I experimented something interesting that I never thought I would experiment. And is that usually police stops me a lot here. because they think I'm a Southeast Asian migrant. When I tell, like, America Genovia, which is Latin America, it changes. But I thought that would be, interesting to mention. And these politics of repair, politics of caring as well, and solidarity are something that, in a way, are portrayed in the work that a sound installation that I'm not showing here right now. I think I'm gonna let people to experience it, since it's gonna be online, since it's online already. This is a picture that I took in my mother's house like a year ago already, and this was a kind of discovery in her house. I was working during the pandemic trying to do something with my life, and then I found my grandfather's machine that wasn't open since he passed away, and I found his all these threads and needles and used pens that of course talked to me. And I think part of this process, then when Pablo invited me to be part of this exhibition, this was already something that was capturing my attention, my senses, and my feelings. And what it is about the work that it's going to be shown, that you can go to even to Times Art Center's website, or to mine, where it actually directs you to actually listen to one of the excerpts of this work, is the history. Pablo says something that I really liked, which is the untranslatable, that some can materialize at the same time. So what we did was making these recordings in this factory, which this industry swallowed all the smaller producers, like my grandfather's, which he was a smaller producer. Then his shop was consumed by a fire, so just one of the machines survived. But by that time as well, that was like the final hit to that business, because for that time, global consumption was different. And tailors like him, which once were very, successful, weren't. I made this frottage, which is not a work, it's just part of the process. This happened very at the beginning. When I was interested, I had to say, I did other kind of work before being interested in my own heritage. But I've always been interested, because I was a kid, I would see the graveyard of my great grandfather, and I would be interested in what this said. But then I found echo with the Chinese community in Guatemala. I went there and they translated what that was also in Chinese. So there's this the building of the Chinese colony in Guatemala, which is civil association that has been there for many decades. This is a picture from a small model that was almost, it was full of, it was very damaged. And then we kind of cleaned it up a little bit, and we showed it in an exhibition in the Chinese Colony Museum, which is a very small community-based museum there that I helped organizing. And I think this work it doesn't portray, but it has all this history of labor, but also all this very small gestures of caring and to bring in. That's why I think this image talked to me, that I took it yesterday, to be honest, and in the tailor as well. I spent the whole day there. And I also talked to him, like my grandfather was a tailor. I think that was, I don't know if I'm oversharing here, but I thought it was more interested in talking about dates of migration. But I think this was it was very special. And but I think this is what I wanted to share. But maybe you can ask me questions that I can maybe say something more about it. I try to, for a summary, I think this is okay.
Thank you so much, Esvin. I think that also we can jump to some questions at the end, but just to say that something that I shared with you during the process of creation of the piece for the exhibition, the Times Art Center Berlin, was the I mean, there was some reference that you were doing to your Chinese last name and the idea of the forest, right? And I don't know if I was already kind of with that on mind, but when I was listening to the piece, I told you that there was something about the kind of like how the texture of the sound of your piece, like the mix, the blend between the industrial sounds of the maquila and the sounds of the sewing machine. There was something that felt even like the sound of water and kind of like foresty in a way. And again, I mean, it's of course like it's just something that I heard, and it is subjective, but that was something quite beautiful as well, right? That you could not hear, you were not just listening to the blend of two sounds, but to something else, right? That was really not related to the machine itself. Yes. So that was something quite powerful, I would say, about the piece you presented. But yeah, we can chat a little bit at the end. And thank you for that. And we will now leave the space for Mimian, please.
Hi, everybody. This is me. And one of my childhood friends, but he's due to most of the communities being like single nuclear families, we were all raised and taught that these childhood friends were our cousins, even though we're not blood related. This is Peter. I wanted to like show him and talk about him because he's very important. I always thought he was my blood cousin until I grew up. And I wanted to show this picture because, and sorry for it being a picture of a picture, but for me it was important. The character of the childhood memory and that type of image that I think also connects with Colectivo Hapa's work, right? And somehow I wanted to make that connection. So when I see my pieces, the image that comes into my mind a lot that is self-referential is this experience of me being dressed in the typical Costa Rican folk dress that people wear for Independence Day and for other occasions, and of how I didn't understand why people were so interested in me wearing this, me or someone like Peter, wearing our typical Costa Rican outfits, because people were just like, you know, always making a fuss, you know, and I'm gonna speak in Spanish. They'll say, "Ay, la chinita vestida de campesina," you know, which is like the little Chinese girl dressed as a peasant, right? And I was just kind of baffled always, and always in this lost in translation experience when I was a kid, and until I grew up, I didn't really understand why this mix would stand out. You know, when my self-esteem was high, I would probably think, oh, I'm the prettiest, you know. But in the end, when I grew up and I understood this hybridity, and I understood how the experience of this hybridity of being, you know, not really, or in my case, not of mixed race, but of mixed cultural upbringing, it really confronted me with a lot of, you know, a lot of dichotomy, a lot of opposing ideas, right? A lot of conflict, but also a lot of, how can I say it? I was able to harvest a lot of very good and positive things. And in the same time, I was able to be critical of a lot of very complicated and almost schizophrenic issues that I had to deal with. So I like showing this image because I feel like this was one of the most immediate experiences where I think it's kind of like one of the sensations that I feel has sustained itself, and it doesn't have this like charged racial this really charged racial or like politicized experience. It's like a real human experience in someone that really is placed in a situation that that person did not really fully understand, because I was a child, and somehow that's how it happens. You know, it kind of like spurs out of immigration, of sometimes like I feel like even though someone migrates, even though they know they're displacing themselves, the experience of it is never what we experience, what we expect, you know. And okay, so this is the image, and so I like to show this because this, after all my artistic studies and explorations, ends up in this, right, which is the facade that I did for the Más Allá, Mar Canta. Okay, so this piece for me is like the abstract representation of that dual personality, of that dual culture that I grew up with. And what happens is that this is well, let me go back to the diagram. Okay, so this is the diagram. This is placed in one of the parts of the facade. And this diagram is of how I constructed my last name, which is Hsu, with bits and pieces of the Helvetica typography. The Helvetica typography was designed to be universal and neutral, and to give way for the content of the text to give form and significance to something that's written, and not the shape and the forms of the font design, right? So when I was confronted with Helvetica as an element for design, I always had this insufficiency where I was always thinking how I could not write my own name. I could not write my own last name with Helvetica, even though it is supposed to be universal. So then where is the universality in that? You know, where are the cultures that do not use the Roman alphabet as their language? So so I decided to construct this and make this new symbol with pieces of Helvetica. And I think that's basically a good metaphor of what immigrants, or at least in my personal experience, that's what I did. I took pieces of one culture to build what existed in the other one, and vice versa. And it is not usually something that's possible or viable, but it is an, I think, ongoing process and an ongoing effort to find this syncretic hybrid and not black and white experience. I always say the experience of a hybrid person is not when you take two Legos and you can take them apart. You know, it's more like when you take two pieces of plaster, one that's one color and the other, and you mix it, and then there's this new color, and you cannot end up with the original colors anymore. And so I think this piece, it talks a lot about that. And so for me, when I see this, I also see La Chinita Vestida Campesina. You know, I also see the little Chinese girl dressed as a peasant. It's that same idea, and it's that same manifestation, right? Sorry that this is not linear, but life is not linear. So okay, so this I want to show to talk about my other piece that's exhibited, which is número 1674, sección administrativa, and the translation is number 1674, administrative section. The name of that piece is actually how you can find the original document in one of Costa Rica's national archives, the Costa Rican National Archive. And okay, let me show the piece first. Okay, so this is the piece. The piece is actually made with two versions of the same piece. The one on the left is a document, is the copy of the original document that's in the National Archive, which is a letter of two Chinese immigrants who came to build a railroad in Costa Rica. So now I'm going back to the photos. This is the Costa Rican Railroad to the Pacific, and these are pictures of it. And this was built by Chinese, Black, and Italian workers. But this is one of the main reasons of the biggest immigrations of Chinese people to Costa Rica. And the letter is written by, sorry, the letter is written by two workers from that immigration who are asking to bring their families to Costa Rica, because for some reason they went back to China, according to the letter. And during that time, something equivalent to the Chinese Exclusion Act that was signed in the United States happened here in Costa Rica, and they were forbidden to bring their families back. So the letter is asking the minister of the government to please let them bring their families back to Costa Rica. And because the letter is written in a very heartbreaking way and language, where they ask to be reunited with what they say is the half of a father's heart, which are his children, right? So I embroider this letter on this Chinese cloth. That's a silk cloth that it's traditionally used to adorn, like to decorate the wedding, the wedding bed on the wedding night. And so I just embroidered this heartbreaking letter of family unity, of a search for a family unity on this very symbolic piece of cloth that is meant to celebrate the unity of a family. I feel like this is also a juxtaposition of the two cultures, but I really wanted to touch on the historic, on the something that kind of pierces through generations and pierces through different family experiences, but shares the same affects, right? It has to do with affection, and it has to do with connection, and with our bonds, our relationships, and not so much. I wanted to zoom into that experience as opposed to talking about historical facts, which are sometimes, most of the time, very dehumanizing. My parents migrated in a completely different situation from a different part of Asia, but our stories are very similar, and I feel like this story is also my story. And it was interesting because when I was in Berlin for the opening, there was this girl that came up to me, and she was Jewish, of Polish descent, and she talked to me after she saw the piece, and she said, "This piece makes me feel like it's about me and my family history." And I was very interested in that, because I feel like in the end, even though we are talking about Chinese diaspora in Central America, the migration, the dislocation, and the need for connection is a story of all migrants. And in the end, aren't we all migrants? So I think that's what I wanted to talk about. I know, Pablo, if you have anything else.
Thank you so much, Mimian. Thank you. No, I will just quickly add that with the installation on the facade, I mean, the work with this juxtaposition of like of Helvetica and your family name, there is something about, you know, when you speak about universality and neutrality, and how is that something, like in this case, a typeface was designed to be neutral and to be universal. And then with when thinking about Chinese characters and your Chinese last names, what you're looking at is the kind of limits of Western universality, right? Mm-hmm. And by using by using Helvetica, but kind of like trying to represent something else, like what you're doing is kind of like twisting a little bit that universality from within, yeah. Right? And I feel that there is something quite powerful, even like formally speaking about that, you know, what Derrida called the logocentrism, right? So what you're doing is using the sign and kind of twisting the sign on itself, which is something that I enjoy a lot about that piece. But again, we can discuss that and that wonderful picture at the end. Did you go to your family archives to find that picture?
Yeah, well, my mom, I've tried to like go and take pictures of things that are memorable for me, you know, from my here, Peter. Well, he's Peter now because he lives in the US, but he's Pedro, which is another hype, you know. This is like how we translate our name. Like, doesn't matter, we change our names to a Spanish name, and then it's like we can easily change it into the English name because there is this flexibility, right, in being hybrid. And just to add to what you said about the and I know we're going to talk about this later, it's interesting that you remind me of things that I don't even remember about myself, which is that the hybridity also has to do for me in this piece specifically, that I am also a graphic designer aside from being an artist. And that's also that like really thin line between art and design, right? And that is something that I intentionally touched on with this piece, aside from the cultural hybridity, is the professional hybridity.
Definitely. Thank you, Mimian. And now I'll leave the space for Colectivo Hapa. Thank you so much. And it's also just, this is a completely random comment, but it's so nice that the three of you fit perfectly on the screen. You know, we can see the three of you. Yeah. So thank you so much for your time. The floor is yours.
So hi, I'm Jenny. And
hi, I'm Karen.
Hello, I'm Anna.
And as Pablo so graciously introduced us, we are Colectivo Hapa. So I think it's important to talk about how we found each other. So we were brought together by our shared experience in being of mixed blood, specifically being born here in Costa Rica, but having Chinese and Taiwanese heritage, which is very different from, you know, Latin culture, like very different. So our work is like fundamentally based in this sort of dialectical relationship between identity and otherness. And I think it's very appropriate that in Cantonese, the word for foreigner is guai, which means ghost, because I feel that sometimes being of mixed heritage makes you kind of like a ghost in which you can kind of move between two worlds, but not really be part of one or the other. So the piece that we're showing in Berlin is called Mimian Hsu. I'm going to show these pieces, these pictures. Okay, I'm going to start talking about these pictures actually. So it's very important for us to talk about the way that we work and how, because that kind of explains how the piece came into being. So we usually get together, and our gatherings aren't only about talking about our work. Obviously, we also get together and gossip and talk about how we're doing, and that kind of leads us to talk about and kind of share very intimate things that relate to our heritage and our experiences as in being mixed people. So in our meetings, we started bringing objects that we found in our mother's house that belong to our mothers, grandmothers, aunts. And these pictures that I'm showing are document kind of these objects. So we have a card that is, I guess it's like one of those cards where you learn how to speak Spanish, and then there's like the Chinese translation on top, and then jewelry that belonged to Karin's mother and grandmother, and then these pictures as well. And then we started like gathering all these objects together, and through these objects we started to like kind of understand our story, even through kind of fragments, right? Not the whole story, even because you can never even grasp the whole story. So the title for our piece in Berlin is called Nushu, which is like it's a secret language that was developed in China and was used exclusively by women in a time when foot binding was still a very common practice. So I think it's very important how this like language came into being, because communicating is such a human, it's like such a human need. And even when things are taken away from us because of our gender, we will always find a way to kind of overcome that obstacle. And we felt that these objects were kind of a continuation of that language, because they were things that belonged to our mothers. And even though they weren't speaking to us directly through words, they were speaking through us through images and stories. And that's how basically our piece came into being. I'm gonna keep on showing these images. So we originally showed this piece.
No, about this picture, I think one of the parts of the process is that we were playing with the objects. We started playing them with them and grasping them to see how we felt and what we would communicate.
So we originally showed this piece in El Museo de Arte y Diseño Contemporáneo here in San Jose. And it originally had the pieces that you can see in the picture. And this was how it was displayed. But for the show in Berlin, we each added a piece that each one of us created, because we felt that in that way we would kind of complete the lineage of the Nushu, because we think it's very important that this piece not only is about our heritage, but it also speaks about us and how this heritage has affected us. So Karin, she made an embroidery, and then Anna did these little cards, and I did a musical piece that accompanies these objects. I want to talk about the picture that accompanies the piece that is framed on top, because when we got together to look at the objects, we were looking through pictures, and we found this picture that it was kind of this size originally, and it had the cutout already made. And it prompted us to think, like, as soon as we saw it, we started asking a bunch of questions, like, who was the person who got cut out? Who cut the person out? Like, what year is this? And I think all these questions can also be, I mean, they're valid questions that kind of also arise when you look at the other objects. And I think these questions are central to in viewing the piece, because we feel that kind of these stories of migration, there's always parts of them that we kind of don't know, but we can kind of get closer to the story through these images and through these objects. So I'm gonna put a little clip of the audio.
What does the voice of my mother sound like? Where does it come from? I want to hear that deep, deep voice. That voice that comes from the womb. What does it sound like? What does it sound like? What does it sound like? What does it sound like when we sing all together?
The song is well, I wouldn't say it's a song. It's like a musical piece. It's a mashup of clips that I recorded of my parents fighting. And I feel like this, I mean, it's like a very intimate thing, you know, and I feel like, how to explain this? Well, my father is Polish and my mom's Chinese, and I feel like that in itself, that clash, not only of them as people fighting, but as my mom as a Chinese person and my dad as a white man fighting, that right there's like a very strong, how do I say, there's a very strong symbolism that is also in the piece itself. So that's why we kind of wanted to bring an element of each one of us into the final piece. Right now we're working on these pieces as well that I think it's very important to reiterate that our work is highly autoethnographical and relies on kind of grabbing, like kind of what Mimian, the hybridization that Mimian speaks about. We also incorporate that into our work, and we kind of grab elements of Chinese culture and kind of appropriate it and make it our own, because in a way we're not Chinese either, or we're not Taiwanese 100%, but we're not also 100% Costa Rican and 100% Latin. So our work is kind of this middle ground where we take elements and then we kind of make it our own, and where we speak about our experiences as being women living in Latin America, but with Asian heritage.
We appropriated this Chinese plating aesthetic, which is like Chinese food design. However, we added our view as women, as feminists. So we are playing with this technique of making drawings with vegetables and cutting them into flowers and art. And we are photographing them. And next year, we're going to be part of a collective show at Apex Art, New York, curated by La Revuelta de Arte, which is a Guatemalan group of feminists curators. And so we're going to show you like a preview of the piece we were working on for that show, which is a video performance of how we do these plates together. And it was also a chance to perform our identities through clothing and, you know, makeup, and to really like dress up like Mimian's folk little dress. We wore Chinese outfits, and we started like recording us cutting up the vegetables. And the final piece is like this mixture, another mixture of elements, which is a tiny house that we created, and then we recorded each other and put the images inside this little house. So this is our latest process. That's what we wanted to show.
Thank you so much. There are many things that are coming to mind, and I would like to start by, I mean, I think that two kind of tropes that are kind of emerging while I'm listening to you. One is kind of the troubling idea of mestizaje and how it relates to kind of identity, but also more than identity, kind of being in the world. Like, what is the place that we have as mestizos, and how we build a place of enunciation for ourselves. And the other is like thinking on how the personal becomes political in a way, and in what moment like the personal or the intimate has an aesthetic value, right? Like when is that? Why is that I think that this personal story deserves to be heard? And why is that I think that this personal story has a kind of like an aesthetic dimension, how that transition works? So I would like to, leaving those 2 points, maybe start with the first. And like by listening to Esvin, Esvin, you mentioned that maybe at the beginning your work was not necessarily based on these personal histories. You were perhaps looking at, I don't know, different formal exercises and so on. And it is something that you've become perhaps more keen recently. Mimi and you, on the other hand, and Apa, you both have been working with a kind of like a personal dimension that you make explicit in a way in your work. So yeah, I was wondering, how is that you, like in the process of creation, how is that you understand this kind of intimate personal dimension in terms of the work? Like what is that an artwork is saying that maybe you cannot say with like just by telling your personal history? Is it something that works for you as some kind of catalyst, or it's just part of like how you kind of see yourself as artist?
Thank you, Pablo. That's a very complicated, good question, because it's like almost philosophical, you know, like but it's a good one. Thank you. I think one of the things that I'm really interested in as an artist is to make or to create something that can be a counter image. So I think when I do this is because I'm interested, and maybe that's why I didn't want to. Well, first of all, it was a long process, like to understand this, because as everyone said this already, understanding ourselves as mixed, it is complex. In particularly, I'm gonna say it from Guatemala. I read this not a long time ago, but there's this Claudia Barreno. She's an anthropologist, and she made her thesis about the migration in Guatemala, the Chinese migration. And I remember something that she says there that makes a lot of sense, and is how, due to Guatemalan national construction, how binaristic it became, and how the white colonizers made, of course, at the beginning, there was like what happened, and also in Costa Rica, for example, the explosion, the politics of explosion. There was this word that I never forget, is degeneration, how like it's going to be a degeneration race. Like, for example, there was in the media, a lot of people saying like it's going to be a degenerated race if they mix with the natives here, with, in the case of Guatemala, Mayan people. So that was, and then later, the white colonizers became like to do it like as a whitewash to Chinese culture, which at the end of the day, it's neglecting it and making people to actually deny that or live in a very extremely private lives. That's why the Chinese colony is also super closed for many reasons, but this is one of them. So this is why I think by the act of enunciating it, and when I realized that, is that I became also more interested in actually showing it. Sometimes that's why I think I try to be very respectful for that history, but honoring in the way it's been articulated at the same time. So yeah, it's been a process that it's political, obviously. And I think more my work has to do it, but also by the fact that I remember my friend the other day told me like, Esvin, help me to do like, I wanted to go out of the closet, my artistic closet. Like, what do you mean? I was like, oh, because you have done like queer work. I was like, what do you mean? Like, I think it's not something I plan. It comes sometimes out. It's in this way, it's deeply human. When something comes out of your body, you cannot explain. I think that it should be a little bit as well, and you have to defend that fact. You know, that makes sense.
Totally. Thank you for that, Esvin. I was just quite haunted, if you want, by the idea of two things with what you mentioned in relation to your work, like the archival work with Hapa and all of like these objects. One is all this history around a language that was just kind of like a secret language used by women, right? And then how you see that these objects somehow resembles or operates as similar to that language, right? They hold meaning, and meanings that are somehow, somehow enigmatic, so there is something about that enigma that can be read just by certain people, by a family lineage, by women. So I think that idea is very interesting and powerful. And on the other hand, what you just mentioned about this translation of otherness as kind of ghost in Cantonese, right? And which refers to otherness. Because in kind of going back to notions of mestizaje, I'm thinking on how because the thing with mestizaje, and in this case Chinese mestizaje, let's say in Central America, with all of its nuances, is that it is not the hegemonic mestizaje of the nation state, right? So like for instance, looking at Mexico, the hegemonic form of mestizaje, that it was a project of the nation state or the republic, the Mexican Republic, was not needed to marginalize other forms of mestizaje like Chinese, right? So I'm thinking that then some manifestations of mestizaje doesn't find echo in the nation state, and that's perhaps their power, right? That you are not part of the mainstream of the circulation of the meaning of mestizaje, right? It's a different mestizaje. It's kind of a ghostly kind of mestizaje in this case. And I was wondering, how do you see that? And how is that you explore that, perhaps like artistically, but also personally in your practice?
This kind of being a ghost, well, I feel personally is kind of like having a superpower, because you can have access to, you can see things and experience things that not everyone has access to. And you're very right in saying that this type of mestizaje in particular isn't kind of like, it's not acknowledged by the state. So there isn't like a kind of a real place for it in the sense that there's a place for, let's say, indigenous and Spanish mixes, you know. And I feel like our work is kind of, it's a paving of, or it's a making of this space that doesn't exist. So it's a space where we can not legitimize it, but kind of visibilize it. And you were talking before about how, like, in what moment our intimacies become kind of works of art, right? So, and we feel that, well, Colectivo Hapa is a feminist collective, so we feel that these intimacies and these personal kind of stories or experiences, well, for a long time, they were relegated to the domestic sphere, you know, and never to the public one. So we feel that this reversal of the domestic with the private, or the public, it's highly political. And that's what our work wants to kind of, that's where our work stands, we feel.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there is something that you can perceive, particularly in this piece that we presented at the exhibition. There is something about kind of assemblage of these objects that becomes something more than the sum of its parts, let's say. And that works quite well. And I mean, I'm also interested in this idea of a sort of counter-ethnography. Counter-ethnography is an artistic methodology of work when it comes to the production of images, film, archival material. It's something that hasn't been quite well explored in artistic practice, but I think that there is a moment for this now, and that is something that I see in your work, that I see also with many indigenous contemporary practices. Jump into you, Mimian, as well, and kind of following that line, that when thinking about Helvética and like the power of symbols and the power of signs, I was remembering this. So there is this debate, kind of conversation between Gayatri Spivak and Judith Butler. There was in early 2000s. And they are talking about this moment where a huge manifestation of immigrants in the US came and took the streets in LA, and they started to sing the US national anthem in Spanish. Wow. So, you know, like it was such a simple gesture, but the question was more like what it means to use the same force of the national anthem as a sign that then you twist, right? Similar to what I was mentioning to you. And after that happened, of course, like the President Bush by then was completely disturbed by it. And one of the statements, one of the statements was that the national anthem of the US is just to be sung in English.
Wow.
Right? So, but you know, it was very interesting because why? Like, such a simple act can kind of sabotage a whole kind of infrastructure, you know, of power, of meaning. And in that sense, I was kind of like thinking of your piece, you know, and how is that you can, through simple kind of gestures, you again kind of like question the logocentrism of the supposedly Western universalisms, right? And that, in a way, I mean, I find also very like powerful to see how is that you relate that to the photograph that you show at the beginning, right? So again, you know, you have this kind of conceptual move, and then you contrast that with such an intimate personal image of you as a child, right?
Yeah, I think, well, thank you for that, because I really like how you like tied it together, and how I mean, a manifestation of cross-dressing, you know, you could call it cross-dressing, right? Where you use, depending on the symbol you use, it is something that becomes attractive or applauded, you know, because somehow it It's like the La Chinita Vestida Campesina, the little Chinese girl dressed as, you know, somehow colonized as us, is something that people applaud, as opposed to if someone translates a national anthem, which is a symbol of my identity of who I am, cannot be cross-dressed and distorted, right? I think the problem with that I have with every time someone says, oh, this is so universal, every single time I cringe. And I cringe because of one very specific reason, is that when you think you're achieving universality, it's like when you take this square shape and you extrude something that is not square, and then you leave so many things out of it, right? When I write my last name in Helvetica using pieces and breaking it apart to put something together, I am actually making myself visible in a universal effort to make me invisible, right? And I think that is exactly what happened with singing a national anthem, the U.S. national anthem in Spanish. It is making, you know, these immigrants were making themselves visible in a symbol that is used to make them invisible, right? When tying it back to what Colectivo Hapa was talking about, is about creating this space that didn't exist before, right? Because when you are a minority that is not even considered in the national narrative, you're supposed to not exist. But the fact that we are here, you know, and you can touch us and we can talk and we can speak and we do have all these built identities, is something that, you know, is not deniable. That's why I think personal narrative is so important in art, you know. And I think also tying back to the question of why I use art as opposed to just telling my story, you know, is because I think experience and the non-negotiable impact of existence makes a good argument. I always say that art is a way of convincing the other, using experience and using our sensations, using our affects, and using our senses, right? And I think that's why, I think that's probably why I don't want to speak for everybody else, but I do sense that the work of everyone that's in this call has a lot of that, you know. But yeah, I think basically when you construct, when you use the symbols that are not meant for you to represent yourself, you are cross-dressing that, and you are creating this contradiction that is really important to question that hegemonical, and many times you can say colonial, many times you can just say that it's invisibilizing efforts of people, you know, of individuals and groups and experiences. I think that's where it lies, and that's where the effort, you know, becomes a struggle, but it's a good one. I like it.
Thank you, Mimian. I don't know if someone wants to add something to this, or something that you had like there on the tip of your tongue and you didn't say.
I'm sorry that God just right away, but that's a good question, because you mentioned something that I think I didn't say, and as you were talking about the last name of my mother, which comes from my grandfather as well. I showed you this image of the frottage, the grave. The last name is there. This is how I learned the last name, how it was written in Chinese. This is the first time I saw it, even before I knew what it was saying. When somebody translated, I was like, oh, this is it. And they showed me like, look, this is like two trees and it meets forest. So that was very important, and for this work that is shown in Times Art Center. And as you mentioned, yes, that's this idea of this kind of texture that it has of liquid or something that it's haunting. As you said, I like a lot the word you use. It's kind of, you know, it makes you curious, but it kind of transports you to like in the forest. Sometimes you can kind of listen like, oh, this might be a machine, but also you can listen something was watery or in flux. You can listen to my grandfather's machine that is being like swallowed by this bigger presence, and then it's on loop. So I think that was everything. I mean, something important that I wanted to say. Thank you.
Oh, I want to add something. Now that Esvin said, I tend to digress, but then touching on affection, I wanted to share, I hope Esvin doesn't mind. When I met, because, and I think this is important because it has to do with art, but it has to do with, I think it connects with the idea of diaspora and how sometimes we feel more entangled with someone and closer to someone, even though Esvin is from Guatemala, right? Or even though Colectivo Hapa, we didn't know each other, not all of us, until recently. How there is this sense of us, you know, even though we're from, we probably, I do feel every time like this bond and this sense of community. And I think it has to do with the fact that we're this like otherness, right? But it also has to do with the distance and how our like parts of our original roots are in Asia, right? And this like shared experience. When I met Esvin finally in person, because we already knew about each other, we were like mutual fans, right? But we finally met in person. And I always remember because when we showed together in Osage in Hong Kong, right? And Esvin was able to go and I wasn't able to go, but I had been in Taiwan and Hong Kong many times before visiting family, but Esvin hadn't. And I don't know, it was this impulse of mine when I saw him. Esvin always says he thought like it was gonna be like this, like, you know, very normal meeting, but due to my like natural intensity, he walked in and I think I didn't even say hi to him. I was like, did you cry? Did you cry when you stepped on Chinese soil? Did you cry? Right? And Esvin was so completely baffled when he received this question, but he was so wonderfully honest, and he just like with this intense stare back, because Esvin is also very intense. He looked at me and he said, yeah, I did, uncontrollably, right? And I really wanted to share this because this is also something that, aside from us speaking about hybridity and how hybridity is something that touches, I think, everybody. You know, whoever says they don't have that experience is probably very aloof with their own family history. But there is also, yeah, that's us in Guatemala. So there is this thing of the dislocation between, like, from somewhere as far away as China. And there's this shared experience about, like, even though I still have like very strong connections with my family in China and Taiwan, and Esvin has had to like find it and somehow like dig for it, right? And he has to bump into it. There is this inexplicable experience of having roots in two different continents and having to travel and cross oceans to be able to be one, that I think is very moving. And you cannot really express, just like with some art pieces, right? You cannot express it just telling the story. You cannot expresses to making a document or writing this text, you have to express it through emotion and affection, and I think that's, yeah, I want to overshare that.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that, Mimian. Esvin, can you show the picture again? Just to, I couldn't.
Yeah, when was this, Mimian? This picture we took of us? Here it is.
That's when you invited me to Pagoda Imaginaria.
Yes, Mimian was in Guatemala.
We were in the Chinese store in Ciudad de Guatemala.
You know, we're like the terracotta warriors.
Yeah, of course.
Central American terracotta warriors.
Just, sorry to talk that much, but I know because we are sharing, sorry, Hapa, you'll talk next. It's just one thing that I think is important, that when Mimian asked me that, yeah, of course I was shocked. But it was so good, the question, because I forgot I did. When she asked me that, it was like, it was like when I was in Costa Rica, I was already with my bags, I was leaving. It was just 2-day trip, something like that. I needed to do something and come back. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna meet Mimian, I'm gonna leave to the airport. And as I get there, she asked me like, just directly there, like, did you cry? And I just realized, like I did, but I realized I forgot because it was very intimate, something. And I think this relates with something that Colectivo Hapa said, is how these things are forgotten very easily because many things which are important in our histories are not documented. Like archives are the same at the end, come from very specific contexts and processes, but many of all, so I think this is why exactly all these reactions we are having are such an important dialogue. So questions are great, Pablo. I want to say also thank you for that, because these questions kind of bring also these reactions that we might just be diluted, in everyday life. Anyway, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Esvin. No, I would maybe to wrap it up. I think that there is something about the nuances of these trajectories related to family, history, our own mestizajes, the relationship that we might have with an idea of ancestrality, for instance, and so on, that worked mostly not through the insistence of identity, not on the insistence of who I am, because that's kind of a troubling question. It is activated more through difference and through connection, so that set of constellations of connections, traveling, moving, seeing how I feel myself in Costa Rica, in Guatemala, in the States, in China, that is what it actually makes us kind of like have a sense of the common, right? So identity is one of the learnings I would say I take from this. It's not about perhaps identity as kind of an individual, let's say, sort of search, but it's more about how our differences and our connections are articulated in a common space, right? So that's why when I think about this exhibition, sometimes I kind of, I wonder how much the exhibition is about the Chinese diaspora and how much maybe it's more about Central America and the Caribbean. It's an exhibition about Central America and the Caribbean. And because our region is that, our region is that constellation of people, of nuances, of ethnic backgrounds, of common anti-colonial struggles. And so, yeah, that's what I take from you all today. And thank you so much for your time. It was really, really enriching. It was a treat to talk to you. And well, the exhibition is going to be still open, and it will be till December 19. So if you're in Berlin, please stop by. And thank you, Esvin, thank you, Mimian, thank you, Jennifer, Karen, Anna. It was great chatting, and hopefully sometime soon.